They thought $500 could bury me. In their minds, it was the perfect excuse, small enough to seem trivial, yet convenient enough to dress up as a violation. What they didn't know was that $500 was about to become their most expensive mistake. My name is Nina Ward. For 8 years, I was the ghost in Argentum Dynamics machine, the unseen hand that kept its infrastructure breathing. Through 3 CTOs, 2 acquisitions, and countless pivots, I was the one keeping production alive at 3 a.m., tracing memory leaks across 7 microservices while the rest of the city slept. I never sought visibility. No keynotes, no glossy photo ops. My name didn't appear in company newsletters. Let others chase fame. I chased uptime. That October morning in Seattle was like countless others. Rain hammered against the office windows. My desk was a fortress of empty coffee cups and debugging logs. A 3rd cup in hand, I scrolled through batch process reports. Everything green, stable, unremarkable. My code wasn't pretty, but it ran like clockwork. Got a minute? I looked up. Logan Prince, our new CTO, stood by my desk. Designer suit, practice smile, the kind of smile you learn in case studies, not server rooms. 6 weeks into his tenure and already infamous among engineers. Harvard MBA. 0 background in coding. Hired, according to his self-congratulatory all-hands email, to modernize our operations. Half the senior team had updated their LinkedIn profiles the day his appointment was announced. "Sure," I said, locking my screen. He didn't sit. Power move number 1. Stand while others sit, project authority. Straight out of the management gospel. "I've been reviewing the code base," he began, his tone balanced between condescension and forced politeness. "Your work is interesting." 20 years in engineering had taught me that interesting meant trouble. "The systems are stable," I replied, voice deliberately neutral. "Uptime is at 99.97% this quarter." "Stability isn't everything." He shifted, shoes squeaking against the polished floor. "Your code is difficult for the team to maintain. All these custom libraries, unconventional patterns. We need to think about technical debt." Technical debt, the catchphrase every non-technical executive deploys when they don't understand why things work but are convinced they shouldn't. I'd heard it from his predecessors too. Each time they learned the hard way that what they called debt was the glue keeping the entire infrastructure from collapsing. "Which components specifically concern you?" I asked, calm, professional. "All of it, frankly, but that's not why I'm here. Tsunid." He pulled out his phone, thumb swiping across the screen. "This purchase, last month, $500 for a software license, personal credit card, no approval." My stomach tightened. The monitoring tool. Procurement had stalled for 6 weeks, as they always did, wrapped in red tape and outdated processes. So I'd bought it myself, integrated it, and already it had saved us from 2 potential outages. "I submitted the expense report," I said evenly. "It's pending reimbursement." "Not anymore." His smile sharpened. "Using personal funds for company software is a serious violation. Circumventing procurement, potential security risks, financial impropriety." "It's a monitoring tool," I reminded him. Procurement was dragging their feet. The tool prevented downtime. "Doesn't matter." He slid the phone into his pocket. "This is grounds for immediate termination. Security will escort you out." 8 years, erased in a sentence, not performance, not misconduct. Just a box checked in a Harvard-trained mind, eager to mark territory. "What about the reimbursement?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Denied. You made an unauthorized purchase. That's on you." I stood, slowly, deliberately, gathered my notebook, my coffee mug. Around me, the morning bustle continued as if nothing had happened. Keyboards clacked. Laughter at the coffee machine. No one realized they were watching an execution. "Your badge and laptop," Logan said, hand extended. I unclipped the badge, placed it on the desk, pulled the laptop from its dock. Every movement precise, controlled. Inside, something colder had already begun to spin up, a process calculating, relentless, unstoppable. "Anything else?" I asked. "Security will meet you at the elevator," he replied, already turning away. I walked to my desk one last time, picked up my small succulent alive through 3 office moves, patient, resilient, like me. As I crossed the floor, Tara from legal passed by, coffee in hand. "Everything okay?" she asked, brows furrowed. "Just leaving," I said softly. "Take care of yourself, Tara." Confusion lingered in her eyes as I moved on. The security guard, a young man, maybe 22, uncomfortable in his role, fell into step beside me. "Sorry about this," he muttered. "Not your fault," I replied. The elevator ride stretched eternal. 23 floors of silence. By the time the doors opened onto the lobby, the calculation in my head had hardened into resolve. They thought $500 was worth discarding 8 years of expertise, of midnight rescues, of invisible labor. They had no idea what they had just purchased. Seattle rain had softened to mist as I stepped onto the sidewalk, plant under one arm, phone in the other. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed, Tara Chen, law school friend, specialist in intellectual property. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, stranger, long time. Everything okay?" I glanced back at Argentum's glass tower, its logo gleaming above the wet city streets. "It will be," I said. The coffee shop Tara chose was one of those aggressively hip places, exposed brick, Edison bulbs, baristas in denim aprons who treated lattes like sacred rituals. I spotted her immediately, sharp as ever, in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "You look like someone kicked your dog," she said as I slid into the booth opposite her. "Close," I replied, exhaling. "Got fired this morning." Her eyebrows shot up. "Argentum finally imploded?" "New CTO. Decided to make an example out of me over a $500 expense report." "Jesus, after 8 years?" She whistled, low and incredulous. "That's brutal, but technically legal. At-will state, remember? They can fire you for wearing the wrong socks." I wrapped my hands around the mug, soaking in its warmth. But firing me wasn't the part that mattered. What mattered was what they'd unknowingly stepped into. "That's not why I called you," I said, flipping open my laptop. On the screen, repository after repository appeared, each stamped with commits, version histories, documentation. Some under MIT license, others under GPL. But then Tara stopped scrolling at one particular repo, her expression shifting from casual to razor-sharp focus. "This isn't open source," she said slowly. "No," I admitted, a faint smile tugging at my lips. "That's mine. Drafted my own license 3 years ago, free for personal use, but any commercial entity has to pay. And Argentum has been using it across their entire infrastructure," I finished. "Every server, every build pipeline, every product release touches my libraries, and I've been tracking it." Tara leaned back, eyes widening as I slid a USB drive across the table. Usage logs. 3 years of API calls, CI/CD builds, even internal Slack messages where they discussed my code. "You beautiful paranoid genius," she murmured, shaking her head. "You've been preparing for this." "Not preparing," I corrected. "Surviving. Companies love your work but hate paying for it. I just made sure the rules were clear, even if no one bothered reading them." She opened a document, scanning the numbers I'd calculated. Her eyes widened again. Conservative estimate, 4 million in unpaid licensing fees. "And that's being generous," I added. "If I revoked their access today, they'd have to rewrite half their systems, which they can't do because they don't understand the why, only the what. Tara tapped her pen against the table, already sketching a strategy in her head. We'll need to document every commit, every usage point, every invoice they ignored. Once we send this, there's no going back. They burned that bridge when they walked me out, I said flatly. This isn't revenge. This is accounting. Still, in the back of my mind, I knew it was more than that. This was about the invisible 3 a.m. calls, the nights I held their fragile architecture together with duct tape and prayer. About being essential when things broke, but invisible when they worked. And now, thanks to Logan's arrogance, I wasn't invisible anymore. I left the cafe with a plan and a purpose. Back at my apartment, I opened the monitoring dashboard I'd built on my personal servers, invisible to Argentum. Telemetry streamed in, usage rates, error logs, performance spikes. Not malicious, not sabotage, just information. The kind of data a responsible maintainer would collect. Within hours, I saw the first tremor. A junior developer had pushed a cleanup commit, removing what looked like redundant error handlers. I almost laughed. Those redundant lines were the guardrails against a race condition I'd battled years earlier. Now, error rates spiked quietly, not enough to trigger alarms, but enough that I noticed. It was the first crack in the wall. The tower hadn't fallen yet, but the foundation was groaning. And the irony wasn't lost on me. Logan had spoken of technical debt as if it were some accountant's ledger. But here was the truth. Every shortcut, every uninformed change was its own interest payment. And sooner or later, the debt collector always arrives. I leaned back in my chair, sipping wine as Seattle's drizzle blurred the city lights. For the first time in years, I wasn't responsible for saving them. I was free to watch. They thought they'd purchased my silence for $500. What they'd really bought was a countdown clock, and I was the only one who could hear it ticking. The first failure came quietly, almost shy. A junior developer, emboldened by Logan's gospel of clean code, had stripped out handlers they didn't understand. On paper, the commit looked elegant. Shorter functions, fewer comments, leaner modules. But reality doesn't bow to aesthetics. Within hours, error rates crept upward, just a fraction, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. I did. By the time the issue surfaced publicly, it was too late. Payment processing started to buckle under a memory leak. Customers reported failed transactions. Metrics spiked, servers thrashed, and executives scrambled for explanations. I sat at Pike Place Market when the first alert reached my phone. Old habits made me check, even though it wasn't my problem anymore. A coffee shop corner gave me just enough Wi-Fi to pull up their public status page. Still green, but my dashboard told a different story. RAM usage climbing, response time stretching like pulled taffy. I could almost picture the scene. Logan striding around a conference room, barking vague orders, engineers frantically searching for the elegant refactor that had gutted the system's resilience. They rolled back eventually, but not before 3 hours of degraded service. Thousands of transactions lost, the kind of loss that keeps CFOs awake at night. It was only the beginning. The true disaster arrived with their monthly release cycle. Years earlier, I had built their CI/CD pipeline. Ugly, patchwork, yes. But it worked. It balanced dependencies like a circus performer juggling fire. Service A waited for B, which leaned on C, which relied on A again. A fragile dance, perfected over time. Logan ordered it replaced with something streamlined. Off-the-shelf deployment scripts, polished and modern, but blind to Argentum's peculiar architecture. The result was inevitable, a circular dependency deadlock. Service A deployed, demanding B. Service B failed, waiting for C. Service C choked, locked out by A. The whole platform seized like an engine without oil. I poured myself a glass of wine and pulled a folding chair onto my balcony. From there, Seattle's skyline glowed against the drizzle. Argentum's tower blazed with light. War room all-nighter, pizza boxes piling, caffeine-fueled panic. Inside, they were discovering a truth I'd lived for years. Clean doesn't always mean functional. The next morning, my phone rang. Caller ID, Argentum Dynamics. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello, Nina." A voice I knew well. Marcus, senior engineer, one of the few I respected. "Hey, I said carefully. "I know this is awkward, but we're in trouble. The new deployment system's locked up. We can't untangle it. Logan's losing it. Could you just point us in the right direction?" I leaned against the counter, staring out at the sound. I felt for him, truly. Marcus was competent, loyal, but trapped under management that cared more about appearances than stability. Still, sympathy couldn't override principle. "I don't work there anymore, Marcus." I know, but please, just a hint." I closed my eyes, remembering his late-night Slack messages during outages, his exhausted gratitude when I patched another invisible hole. He didn't deserve this. "Check your dependency graph," I said finally. "Look for cycles, that's all I'll say." A pause, then a heavy sigh. "Thanks, Nina, and I'm sorry." Don't be. Remember this moment next time someone tells you to fix what isn't broken. I hung up. For years, my instincts had been the safety net beneath them. Now they'd learn what it felt like when the net was gone. By morning, the blogs had already picked up the story. Argentum Dynamics suffers second major outage in 2 weeks. Their stock price sagged another percentage point. Recruiters smelled blood, circling their engineers like sharks. LinkedIn buzzed with open-to-work banners. I swirled the wine in my glass and smiled faintly. Logan had wanted modernization. He was getting it, in the form of crumbling systems, fleeing talent, and headlines that screamed failure. The best part? I didn't lift a finger. I just watched. In Greek tragedy, hubris always precedes downfall. Logan's hubris was believing code could be replaced like wallpaper, that uptime was a vanity metric, that a $500 decision could erase 8 years of invisible labor. But hubris has a price, and the collector was knocking at his door. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, Seattle in its most familiar costume. While commuters crowded onto buses and executives hurried toward downtown towers, Tara pressed send. Our demand letter landed in Argentum's legal inbox at exactly 9 a.m., sharp enough to cut. I didn't need access to their Slack channels to imagine the fallout. The chain reaction would be instantaneous. Legal scans the claim, scoffs, then forwards it up the ladder. Executives glance at the dollar amount, dismiss it as bluster, until a technical reviewer finally confirms the nightmare. Every system in Argentum's infrastructure was running on my code. Unauthorized, unpaid, unprotected. At 10:47 a.m., my phone rang. Caller ID, Argentum Dynamics. "Please hold for Logan Prince," the receptionist said. When his voice finally came through, it had lost its corporate gloss. "Nina," he began, trying for calm. "We just received a rather alarming letter from your attorney." "Then you should probably have your attorney contact mine," I replied, steady as glass. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," he said quickly. "I'm sure we can resolve this. Be reasonable." "You had your chance to be reasonable," I reminded him, "when you fired me over a legitimate business expense." "That's separate," he snapped. This is extortion." "No, Logan, this is contract law. You've been using my proprietary software without a license for 3 years. The terms are clear." He faltered, grasping for footing. "The company can't just write a check for $2 million. Should have thought of that before you saved $500. The silence stretched so long I could almost hear him grinding his teeth. I ended the call before he could recover. By afternoon, Argentum's legal team fired back, disputing our claims with boilerplate intimidation. Work for hire supersedes personal licensing. Company property trumps individual ownership. Tara barely glanced at it before smirking. They're bluffing. I countered with the full audit trail, timestamps from my personal laptop, commits logged at 2 a.m. On weekends, Slack threads where their engineers openly discussed borrowing Nina's repo to patch production. The evidence wasn't just airtight, it was suffocating. And then came the public blow. A frazzled junior developer, overwhelmed and undertrained, accidentally pushed internal documentation to a public repo. No passwords or customer data, thankfully, but detailed architecture diagrams. Enough for the tech world to glimpse just how dependent Argentum was on my libraries. Within hours, Argentum built on engineers' side projects trended on Twitter. Tech blogs feasted. Stock dipped another 3%. My inbox flooded. Startups wanted to license my code. Recruiters dangled six-figure architect positions. Even acquisition offers rolled in for my intellectual property. It was validation dressed as opportunity, and I forwarded the most tempting ones to Tara. "You're evil," she texted back, "and I love it." Meanwhile, Argentum's house divided. One camp of engineers scrambled to reverse engineer my libraries, convinced they could replicate years of blood, sweat, and intuition in a few weeks. The other camp scoured the market for replacements, desperate for off-the-shelf solutions that simply didn't fit Argentum's twisted architecture. Both efforts failed spectacularly. Watching it unfold, I couldn't help but think of history's corporate blunders. Kodak ignoring digital photography until it devoured them. Blockbuster laughing Netflix out of a boardroom, only to vanish into obsolescence. Arrogance blinds leaders to small decisions that later topple empires. Logan had dismissed $500 as nothing, but small stones cause avalanches, and his was already roaring downhill. He called again that evening. I let it go to voicemail. "Nina, this is Logan. The board is concerned. I'm sure we can find a mutually beneficial solution. Please, call me back." I poured myself another glass of wine and hit delete. Argentum thought they'd buried me, but I was no longer a ghost in their machine. I was the storm outside, waiting, patient, inevitable. By the end of the week, Argentum was no longer fighting me. It was fighting itself. Outages rolled in like waves, each one more expensive than the last. The deployment pipeline, stripped of the messy workarounds I had once maintained, limped forward on digital prayers. One Thursday, a botched update took down the customer portal for 6 straight hours. I didn't need insider access to know what that meant. Frantic account managers, enterprise clients threatening to walk, board members demanding answers. Rebecca, an old colleague from finance, texted me in hushed disbelief. "Board called an emergency meeting. Logan looks like he's about to cry." And then, just like that, he was gone. Fired overnight. His name reduced to a sterile press release, pursuing other opportunities. The corporate fig leaf. Everyone in the industry knew what it really meant. He had been offered up as a sacrifice. The very next morning, Tara called. Her voice crackled with a restrained kind of glee. They blinked. Full payment of the invoice, plus interest, plus legal fees, and they're asking to negotiate an ongoing license. I sat down heavily, letting the numbers wash over me. $2.4 million. The calculation I had scribbled half in anger, half in hope. Now it was real. "They caved that easily?" I asked. "They didn't cave easily," she corrected. "They're drowning. You just threw them the only life raft left." By Tuesday, I walked back into the same tower I had been escorted from weeks before. The irony wasn't lost on me. Same lobby, same elevators, but now I entered not as an employee to be discarded, but as a vendor with bargaining power. The conference room was packed. Board members, interim CTO, legal counsel, Even the CEO patched in from New York. "Ms. Ward," the board chair began, her tone polished but weary. "Thank you for meeting with us. We'd like to discuss a long-term arrangement." They laid it all out: an annual licensing fee, a consulting contract, even a support retainer. Generous numbers designed to seduce. For once they spoke my language, not the language of intimidation, but of value. But numbers weren't enough. "I appreciate the offer," I said, calm but firm. "But I have concerns. You fired me for writing code that worked, in favor of code that looked clean. What's changed?" The interim CTO leaned forward, dark circles under his eyes. "We've learned that lesson, painfully. We need stability, not aesthetics. We need your work." The board chair tried a softer angle. "And about that reimbursement, the $500, we've approved it, with interest. Procurement policies have already been revised." I almost laughed. All this, and they thought paying back $500 would erase the insult. "One more thing," I said, leaning into the silence. "A public statement. Argentum must acknowledge that its infrastructure was built on open-source contributions from its engineers. That innovation comes from empowerment, not constraint." The CEO's voice came thin through the speaker. That's unusual." "So is firing someone over $500, I replied. "Take it or leave it." 5 minutes later, they agreed. That afternoon, I signed the licensing agreement, $400,000 annually for unlimited use of my libraries, plus hourly consulting fees. The statement went public the next day, carefully worded, polished for damage control, but the message was clear. Argentum valued its engineers. Logan's departure was buried in a Friday news dump, but the community connected the dots. From my apartment, I read the statement twice, then set my glass of wine on the windowsill beside my succulent. I had won. The money, the recognition, the justice, it was all there. But victory tastes different than you imagine. It wasn't champagne and triumph, it was exhaustion. Vindication laced with a strange, hollow ache. I had burned my professional home to the ground. The place I had given 8 years of my life, now reduced to invoices and settlements. Tara called later that evening, buoyant with adrenaline. "You did it. You won." "Did I?" I asked quietly. Because revenge feels sharp in the moment, but dull in the reflection. Was it really about the money? Or was it about dignity, the right not to be erased by a careless smile and a denied reimbursement? I looked again at that little succulent, patient, resilient. It had survived 3 office moves, years of neglect, and still managed to grow. Maybe that was the real victory, not destroying Argentum, but proving to myself that I could survive outside of it. 2 years have passed since that morning when Logan smiled and escorted me out over $500. In those 2 years, Argentum Dynamics has remained one of my best clients. Their new CTO, promoted from within, someone who actually understands code, sends me holiday cards. We work together with mutual respect and, most importantly, clearly defined contracts. But Argentum is no longer my cage. It's just one of 23 companies that now license my libraries. I employ 2 developers of my own, people who never have to wonder whether their work will be dismissed as technical debt. We set our own hours, choose our own clients, and never argue over expense reports. Logan? He didn't last long at his next job. Metacore Solutions thought they were getting a visionary. Instead, they got outages, instability, and the same hollow speeches about modernization. 6 months later, he was out again. Last I heard, he was teaching at a business school, lecturing bright-eyed MBAs on technical leadership. Perhaps he tells them about me. Perhaps he doesn't. If he does, I hope he explains how $500 ballooned into $12 million in damages and settlements. I hope he frames it as a cautionary tale. Treat engineers as assets, not expenses. But if I know Logan, he probably edits himself out of the tragedy. Meanwhile, my life looks nothing like it once did. I rent a co-working space overlooking the Sound. My succulent thrives on the sill, now sprouting offspring I gift to clients as quiet reminders. Resilience grows roots when you least expect it. I keep the original invoice framed on the wall, denied, stamped across it in corporate red. My most valuable artifact. Proof that sometimes the smallest insult cracks open the largest opportunities. The monitoring tool that started all this still runs on my servers. It has prevented dozens of outages for dozens of clients. That improper purchase has generated hundreds of thousands in saved revenue across industries. $500 became priceless. Sometimes, late at night, I ask myself, what if Logan had simply approved that reimbursement? Would I still be at Argentum, quietly maintaining their fragile empire in exchange for a modest paycheck and the occasional good job in Slack? Probably. Comfort breeds complacency. I might never have realized the value of my own work. It took being discarded to discover freedom. Now, when my phone buzzes with another potential client, startups eager to license my code, enterprises desperate for stability, I don't feel desperation. I feel choice, power, agency. No more invisible labor, no more sleepless nights patching someone else's leaks for someone else's glory. The rain drums against my office window, steady as a heartbeat. I close my laptop, satisfied with the day's work, and pour myself a glass of wine. The city lights shimmer through the mist, and somewhere out there, in server rooms and data centers I'll never see, my libraries are still running, silently, reliably, indispensable. They thought they could bury me with $500. Instead, they paid for my freedom. And that freedom, measured not in invoices, not in settlements, not even in revenge, is worth more than anything Argentum could ever afford.